Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. Today I'm going to be continuing this little series that I guess I started unintentionally, which is kind of reviewing my favorite and eventually least favorite male and female characters in books. And today we're going to talk about my top 5 favorite female characters. So let's just jump into it. Coming out at number 5 on this list, I'm going to give it to Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. I think Katniss is a beautifully complex character, and she's not your typical young adult heroine that you often see in YA novels. Katniss, not only is she complex, but she has a lot of history and a lot of trauma, and she is one of those teenagers that is actually thinking forward in her life, and she basically takes the time to actually think, well, what will happen if I do this choice or that choice, and how will that impact me? And one of the biggest things that I love about her is that, you know, she never wants children. She doesn't really want love because she can't imagine raising a child, having a family in the country that is Panem. Katniss is also extremely selfless, and it doesn't always come across that way, but she is. A lot of times she will kind of look like she's cold and unfeeling, but it's because all of her moves are to make sure that her family stays safe at the end of the day. She doesn't want to do anything that is going to put her family in harm, which is part of the reason why she rejected being the Mockingjay at first, because that meant calling attention to something, and what would that mean for her family down the road. I think Katniss is underrated because of all of these complexities, especially as the games continue and the book series continues, and you realize how much trauma that she's going through, and she's not able to deal with it very well. In the third book in particular, which I have a whole video on, her trauma is extremely complex. It goes to a bunch of different lengths between having it actually happen to her, having it vicariously happen to her, and happening to her on different levels, from manipulation, the Hunger Games, seeing people die, having her supposedly lover turn against her. There's all these things, and she just can't handle it, and that's a very human emotion and reaction, and I think it was well done, and that's why I personally think she's a wonderful character. Coming in at number 4 on my list is Rielle Darden from the Furyborn series by Claire Legrand. Now, Furyborn is a high fantasy, technically categorized as young adult, but I would argue that it's one of the more mature young adult books that I've read, and easily could have seen it as an adult novel. I'm surprised it wasn't. But Rielle is from the past timeline in this series, and she is supposedly this Lightbringer, a magic user who is one of a kind, and she's supposed to lead their country into salvation. But Rielle is also a complex character because she is tormented by this power and this supposed angel who wants to corrupt that power for himself and turn Rielle to the dark side. This book series is really interesting too because you kind of know what's going to happen in the beginning of the book, but it's fascinating to see this unfold. Rielle, as I mentioned, kind of knows that she is warring with this good versus evil side to herself, and tries her best to be a good person while also making mistakes because she's trying to protect those that she loves. She undoubtedly betrays her lover, but wants to do it in such a way that she isn't really portraying it. And it just makes this insane kind of hole that you fall down while you're following those two, and you end up really rooting for them, even though Rielle can be such a damn bitch when it comes to it. But that's not her only personality trait, and she really is loving and compassionate and is really just a kid at the end of the day. I mean, she's like 18, I think, but she still has a lot to grow, and she has a very short amount of time to do so. I also love the complexities of how open she is with her sexuality and her relationships. Rielle is a bisexual character, and she is primarily with a man, but talks about wanting to be with women and inviting them even in for a threesome, which I thought was very fascinating. And also just, it was refreshing to see this openness about sex itself. So overall, I really love my complex characters, and Rielle is one of the top complex characters there is out there, especially because when you're given this immense amount of power and you're not told how to use it, but you can be executed if you don't use it right, how would you actually react in that situation if you were her? Coming in at number 3 on this list is Arya Stark from the Game of Thrones series. So I'm mostly basing Arya off of the show, and I know that the show was relatively true to the books to some degree for at least 6 seasons. So I'm going to be talking about that, and we're just going to ignore everything else. But Arya Stark. The thing I love about Arya is she is incredibly young when the series starts, and she has a lot to learn. She is another one who goes through immense amount of trauma, seeing half of her family members die, being whisked away, and never knowing if she's actually going to see her family again, and having to live with this whole idea of, I need to figure out how to protect myself, so either I can save my family or avenge my family. Arya goes through all of these different transformations, from being this young innocent child who just wants to learn how to be a knight, to realizing that this job that she so coveted and admired is really tainted and corrupted, and it changes her into a different path. When her father is killed and all of this kind of goes crazy, she ends up taking a very different path and almost tries to become an assassin instead, which is completely on the other side of the morality scale if you're considering a knight and an assassin. And she just goes on this entire journey of figuring out who she is, and will her love for her family and the need for revenge win out against just genuinely being a good person and moving forward with her own life. I think seeing her character grow from being a 8-year-old child into a teenager and dealing with all of these things is fascinating. And because Game of Thrones is a longer series, I think it more encapsulates how growing up in certain circumstances can vary for every individual. And that's partly why I love her, because you see her at such a young age being vulnerable and manipulated and kind of shaped into who she's going to become later and what that means for her potential. Coming in at number 2 on my list is Ginny Weasley from the Harry Potter series. So Ginny, for a lot of people, I feel like is a very polarizing character, but I always loved Ginny. I think the books do her so much more justice than the movies ever did, and here's why. In the books, you meet Ginny Weasley in book 2, which is The Chamber of Secrets. And Ginny is having her first year at Hogwarts and has a crush on Harry. And you notice how she's this very timid, unsure of who she's going to be little girl, and gets manipulated. But I love how, even though she's also gone through a trauma, she goes in a very different direction than our other 2 characters on this list. Ginny, instead of letting this, define her and ruin her life, she just tries to swing back and be like, nope, I'm taking this back. Just because this happened to me doesn't mean that I am going to break or be someone else. I'm going to be me, and I'm going to make this work. And throughout this process, after being, having a really crazy year 1, she starts to really grow and mold into a fascinating and strong young woman. I love that Ginny has all of these goals and accomplishments and things that she wants to do, despite being overshadowed by the chosen one, Harry Potter. She is another Quidditch player who ends up being excellent at their position, despite being a girl, and goes on to be a captain of the Holyhead Harpies down the line. She's incredibly smart and gifted with her wizardry. And she does make some pretty strong decisions that aren't based off of one of her male character counterparts, which I think is not done a lot. A lot of times I feel like, especially if you have a male lead character, it's really all about them sometimes, and the females are just kind of swept along because of what they do. But I do think Ginny has some shining moments where she does something because that's what she wants to do. And I think that was admirable in a time when this wasn't a norm. I also like that she goes out and explores her own relationships before she ends up with Harry. Because of course, we have this cute little girl crush, but she needs to find herself because she still is relatively young. Harry is young too, but he is dealing with a lot more. Ginny has the time to kind of grow and expand on herself before she kind of gets that locked down into a relationship. And that's part of the reason why I think I like their relationship as well in the end, because it is slow and steady and growing, and they're learning who each other are before they're just jumping in and being like, well, we're together forever. So yeah, Ginny is pretty badass, and I don't care what you say. And number 1 on this list is another character who I just think I connected to and loved from the beginning. And she made a small appearance in the Vampire Academy series and then had an entire spin-off that was dedicated to her, and I loved it. And that would be Sydney Sage from the Bloodline series by Rochelle Mead. Sydney is another character that starts off in one place and by the end of the novel really just becomes her own and owns her independence. When we first meet Sydney, she is an alchemist and she really just does everything to impress her family and make sure that she fits in and never puts a boot out of line. However, she's very miserable in this lifestyle and essentially conforming to her parents and the alchemist government's wishes. And she knows that as she starts diving into the world of vampires and witches and all these different magical beings, she realizes that the alchemists aren't exactly fair in all of their beliefs, and they've never changed their beliefs over hundreds of years. So as she starts kind of mixing in with these folks, she realizes that maybe I just have to think for myself and figure out what my own morality means, which I think is a pretty sweet plot line overall for character development if you can kind of change your entire belief system. I will say that the book is kind of akin, like the alchemists are akin to very severe religious beliefs where, you know, a lot of people will say like the religious beliefs are rigid and if you like leave, you know, you're not welcome back. That is a kind of how Sydney's family also is, where they, you know, if you want to be parted from us, you will be disowned. And that's a real big driving force for her because she loves her younger sister and doesn't want to leave her younger sister in this household, but also wants to be happy for herself. And along the way, you have a relationship with my all-time favorite male character involved in this, and it's just a beautiful, I think the romance and the story, and it's a fun plot too, but I think like the bigger picture themes in this book really just make Sydney shine, as well as her male counterpart in this book, which is Adrian Ivashkov. So I just love the two of them together. I think they're precious, perfect beings, and both Adrian and Sydney in their own right are wonderful and my favorite characters of all time because of all their complexities and their backgrounds and their histories. There you have it, everyone. My very fast, quick list of my top favorite 5 female characters currently of all time. I'm sure this list will change because as I keep consuming and reading books, I keep finding wonderful characters. So in another year, this list could change. But after kind of reviewing all the books I've read so far, these are the characters I always come back to and the ones that really stick out in my mind, that if anyone was going to be like, name a character that you would die for, here's the list. So stay tuned for my next 2 videos, which are going to break down my least favorite female and male characters in books. And let me know down below, who is your favorite female character of all time? Until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.